Hi, this is JD, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. It's a great time now. It's December, and it's a great time to be putting together your plans for the upcoming year. And you may or may not have thought about what you want to create next year, but I encourage you to create the best year that you've ever had. So I'm going to teach you and instruct you, take you through an actual process, a roadmap that you can use to have the greatest year of your life, the greatest year you've ever had. So, let's talk about vision mapping. Vision mapping. What is the vision map chassis? Just like the chassis of a car, right? What is the chassis that we build all of our planning around? And there are several elements in a road mapping process. So here it goes. The first step is to identify a vivid description, a vision, a lovely image of what you want to create. Now you might be asking me, okay, JD, well, within the context of what? Well, it's important that we map different domains or dimensions. So what do I mean by domains or dimensions? Well, I mean your health domain, your relationship with your significant other, your extracurricular activities, what you'd like to do for fun, your intellectual capacity, your personal growth, your intellectual prowess, stimulation, your health, your personal finances. So if you think about sort of the geography of your life, if you think about all the different components that make up the full tone of what makes you happy, the full bandwidth of what makes you happy, you have a number of domains or areas. So I'd like you to consider that for a minute. Imagine you made a list of all the different domains that really drive your planned change, Maybe you want to see change in your health. Maybe you want to see change in your relationships. Maybe social relationships is a key category. So imagine each one of these domains or dimensions like a key body of work where you're going to plan change. And the first step is to identify a vivid description in each area. Now, this doesn't have to be within a certain amount of time. It doesn't mean you're expecting the result in a year. All you're doing is you're identifying what picture, what big idea, big portrait or picture of the area that you could make clear to yourself. Now, this is a fairy tale because it may not exist yet. But what you're doing is you're orienting yourself in such a way where you're looking forward to that picture. And that picture informs how you interact with what you're doing today, how you essentially make decisions today. So I've said two things to you. Number one is that we have a whole list of areas, domains, dimensions. Lay those out. What are they? What are the areas that compose an ensemble, a symphony that has to play together to make you happy? Balancing your life is about lining things up so that they support and reinforce one another, so that you do not experience a sense of neglect in areas that really matter to you. I'm not saying you're going to have it all because you only have a certain amount of space in the container to fill it with, right? You have 168 hours a week, and if you multiply that by 52, you're going to get how many hours you have in 1 year. And time is a limited resource, and so how you use it is really key. And it's really about priorities. So in these areas, what you're identifying is you're saying, okay, what picture do I have that really motivates me? It's not what it is, it's what it does to me. For example, let's say in the health dimension, I see myself going to the beach, I can take my shirt off, and I feel confident, I feel great, I feel exhilarated. That image does something to me, so I have to make it up so that it orients me. I love that image enough to want to see it happen. See, there's a lot of love in creating. You're generating it. I'm not obligated to create that, nor do I have to make a commitment to create that, as if I had to stick to something without a choice to not do it. I can choose that or not. I have a freedom to choose that. And I want to bring it to happen because I just want to. It's an urge that I want to see that happen. So by being honest with myself about what I see, I'm able to trip and lever. I'm able to establish a sense of, here's what I really want to do. Here's what I'm really oriented toward. And that really gets inside me. How I see that is something that really gets me going. So here you have each area. For example, let's take the relationship with a significant other. Developing a vision for that relationship. Writing down what you see. Getting a clear picture of what you want to create. What it looks like. And you may want to manifest other senses that you have. What it feels like to be in that moment. What it sounds like to be in that moment. What it tastes like to be in that moment. What it looks like to be in that moment. What it feels like to be in that moment. So as you describe this for yourself, you're helping yourself by defining how your senses are affected in that moment. You're taking a snapshot. Now, you may want to pick an ideal day and time. Maybe you take a snapshot of a perfect day of this area and what's really happening, what's coming together, what are the elements of it, you know. So let's go through all the areas. As you write them down, you're writing a vivid description of each one. And something you may want to do is have a couple pieces of paper for each area, or in your Word documents, title one, that particular domain. And then next, you're going to write down your vivid description. And you're writing a narrative description in present tense, or you can write it in past tense if you'd like, as if it's already happened, right? You can make that up. That's very powerful. Or you can write it in present tense. This is what's going on. And as you're writing it, you're going to notice some changes. You might notice some physical changes. You might notice you could get a couple butterflies in your stomach. You might notice your skin starts to crawl, and you go, oh, if I could just have that. Boy, that'd be really something. You know, that would really get me going. And so you're going to orient yourself around a picture that you have of each area. Now, how about your business? What does your business look like? Who is your customer? What's your team look like? Right? What's going on there? What do you want to create with your business? What does it sound like? What kind of contributions does it make to people around them? How does the internal team operate? What are some of the key processes? How about the value proposition? What are some of the key milestones and accomplishments of the business? Articulate it in a way that does something to you. If the material doesn't do anything to you, then this tool doesn't serve its purpose. Okay, so now that we've laid out all the areas and we've defined a vivid description, go ahead and pick one of the areas and let's identify what the measurements are. Because what's measured gets done. What's measured gets done. When you measure something, you tend to get it done. So identify 3, maybe 5 measurements. Now, these are specific yardsticks that will help you see whether the vision is coming into being or not. In other words, you're going to be able to measure your true distance. So let's pull out one of my areas. Let me share this with you so you can see what I'm talking about. So I have a specific vision for my health, and I'm writing down how I look. I'm writing down different interactions I'm having with people. A very meaningful portrait that I see. It's from my imagination. And I'm in a real quiet space, and I'm doing that so that I can really get into my right brain. And I see it, and I'm writing it. It's full of adjectives, right? Verbs, nouns. And then I'm going to ask myself, well, what's important to measure? How would I know that is going to occur? What would I look at? And I began to write down measurements. One of those was my weight. Another one was my waist in inches. Another one was my body mass index. How much of my body is actually fat? And there's a way to calculate that. You can calculate that at any gymnasium with any personal trainer. They have a formula for calculating body mass index. How about cholesterol levels? Right? My HDL to LDL ratios. That'll tell me whether I've got a lot of fat in my blood. What's my risk for potential illness? Maybe I want to measure my waist to hip ratio, where my waist is in inches versus my hip in inches. Maybe a 1-to-1 would be perfect, but if I go over a 1-to-1, that's an indicator. Maybe in my health, it's my physical appearance, how many compliments I get on a weekly or monthly basis. Maybe it's number of compliments. Or maybe it's endurance. How many times I can sprint around a racetrack. I can actually sprint around a typical track on the track and field. And I time myself. Maybe it's how fast or how many laps I can actually do until I get exhausted. Or maybe it's being able to measure how many activities I actually do. Maybe if it's sports or athletics, how many games I can play, how many hours I can stay in the game. So you're asking yourself, what would indicate to you that you are making measurable changes or not, in contrast to this vision. And from here, it's interesting. Organically, goals start to take shape. So once you identify the measurements, now you begin to say, okay, what are the ideal measurements? What should my waist be? What would I like my waist to be? What do I want to create? Well, I want to create a 34-inch waist. Okay, great. When do I want to create that by? I want to create that within the next 9 months. Okay, so my cholesterol levels. Well, I want to get it below 200. I want to get it to 180. Well, when do I want to do that by? I want to create a 180 level cholesterol within the next 6 months. And that's a specific goal. It's very specific. There's a result. It's time-bound. It defines when I'm going to accomplish it. It supports my vision. It lines up well. It supports the trajectory of where I'm going. And it's a great marker. And then I identify my body mass index, 25 being normal. I'm at low risk for major disease like heart disease and cancer. So maybe I want to create a 24 in body mass index within the next 90 days. There's one. How about eating habits? How about eating patterns? Number of meals per day or number of calories on average per week or per day. So let's say I'm going to measure that. And let's say, okay, I'm going to measure calories and I'm going to create less than 3,000 calories per day. I had one guy, he was hooked on Coca-Cola. So one of his measurements was how many Coca-Colas he has in 1 week. And of course, his marker was to get to 0 Coca-Colas in 6 months. Because it supported directly the vision that he wanted to create. The number of Coca-Colas he was having was putting a tire around his waist, and it was defying, or it was contradictory to the end result that articulated how he wanted to look. Okay, so you get the idea that we go through each area. In your relationship with significant other, same gig. Your measurements. What are those measurements? Number of date nights? How many orgasms you have in a week? How many compliments you get from your spouse? How many special favors you can offer? Random acts of kindness within X amount of time? Maybe it's trips. Maybe it's romantic interludes. Maybe it's special places that you want to visit. There are certain indicators that are going to indicate that vision is actually occurring that you want to create. So what are the measurements? And then maybe you go to your kids, and there are measurements there. Maybe there are grades. Maybe there are parenting measurements that you look at. So you're going to identify those. And then maybe you go over to other dimensions like your spiritual dimension, maybe how often you read the written word, maybe going to worship, maybe it's taking specific classes. You'll be able to measure that and by when. Or maybe there's a certain set of habits there that you want to live up to. And again, those habits, you may be able to measure them out. Now, some of these measurements may be a little more intangible. That's okay. You may come upon some intangibles. As long as they're meaningful to you and they support the end result, it fits the cause. And then you go over to your business, and of course you may want to measure some typical measurements. Number of customers, number of new customers over X, right? Number of referrals, gross revenue, maybe gross profit, net profit before taxes, turnover ratio. There are a number of measurements, number of ratios that you can use in business that accountants can work with you on. But what are the ones that are meaningful to you in creating that business vision? Maybe it's the average transaction size, how you actually price stuff out. Or maybe it's how many times a customer comes back and buys over X time. Or maybe it's how many past customers that you reactivate, right? Or it's how many referrals you get from spheres of influence and intermediary relationships. Or maybe it's some kind of specific product that you want to sell, how many units you're actually going to move over X time. Maybe they're more sales indicators. Maybe there's cost indicators, right? Your cost of goods sold levels, selling and administrative expenses, your payroll, your risk management levels and services, how much those cost you. So what are all the indicators in your business that you can look at in a dashboard and know whether the engine block's going to crack and you can get to it before that actually happens? And that's so true. See, a lot of us, since we don't establish indicators, we don't have a way to look at current reality and catch the little problems before they exacerbate to big problems. We just don't get to it soon enough. And the reason is we don't have a dashboard. We don't establish a dashboard. And that's what we're doing. And then you go through all the areas and identify your measurements and then establish some goals, some ideal measurements that you'd like to create within a certain time frame. So what we've done is we've established a clear picture that orients us. That's the motivation piece. We've established some measurements and yardsticks that will help us see whether our distance is being made or not. And we've established some ideal targets that will help us measure how far off we are or how on we are to where we want to be. Next is this, is in each domain is to articulate exactly what today looks like. In other words, if you've pictured the vision that you want to create, now picture in actual facts where you stand in relationship to what you want to create. Notice what I just said, where you stand in relationship. By having markers, it makes it a lot easier because now you can take a snapshot of where it actually is. If I say I want an 180 cholesterol, I'm going to look at today what cholesterol levels I actually have. So you've identified what you want to create, what you want, but now you're going to identify what you have now. And this is very powerful when you do this because it allows you to step back and instead of editorializing or putting a lens on where you actually are, it requires you to sober up and to look very directly at the facts. What's really going on? So let's say I want to eat 3,000 calories a day, and I describe current reality, and I say, I am eating currently 4,500 calories a day. I'm eating 3 bowls of ice cream a week, and I look at it and I go, I'm disgusted with that. Whether I have a reaction to it or not, whatever meaning I add to it is not the merit of this exercise. What you're doing is you're establishing a point A. Think of it like taking a trip. How are you going to know how to get where you want to go if you don't know where you're starting from? Doesn't that sound so stupidly simple? I mean, it's something we automatically do. How am I going to get to Chicago if I don't know where I'm leaping off from? But once I know I'm in LA, I know how I'm going to get there. I'm going to take an airplane, and this is how far I'm going to fly. And this is who I'm going to fly with, and this is what I'm going to take. So by knowing where we are, knowing where we want to be, it really helps us establish an action plan that is necessary to move where we are to where we want to be. Now, there's another sort of force that's at play here, and it's a force of nature that I think can work on your side. And we call it structural tension. Structural tension is the natural discrepancy between where you are in contrast to where you want to create. You know, think of it like a rubber band, and imagine you have this rubber band between your fingers. And on one hand, you have the rubber band around your middle finger, and on the other hand, you have your rubber band around the same rubber band around the middle finger, and you're pulling those hands apart. Can you feel the tension? It's trying to resolve itself. Well, what you're doing is you're establishing a structure, a whole system, when you're establishing a current state and then a desired state. So what you're doing is you're saying, okay, I'm going to be honest with myself about where I actually am, and then by doing that, I'm going to hold it right up simultaneously to where I actually want to be. And this sort of contrasting is like, imagine being in a movie theater, and you're looking up and there's 2 screens. In fact, it's a split screen. And on the right, you have the fairy tale, and on the left, you've got a reality show. Imagine that. Can you feel the tension between the two? Now, I'm not telling you just to write down the roadblocks or the obstacles that you face ahead. That's one component of observing current reality. The other part of it is there are certain things that are working. You know, I'm sure that in your relationship, there's certain activities, there's certain aspects of it that really are working and you should continue doing and building on. And then there are other aspects that are really out of alignment with what you want to create, and this is what you're doing. And by having an understanding, a gathering of where you actually are, you actually start this structural tension. And several things happen within that structural tension, you know. It's like an archer that's pulling the bow apart. You know, that tension's going to excel the arrow forward. And the more honest you are about it, and the more true to what you really love, what you really want to create, the more tension you have to work with. It's like the fire between the logs heightens the flame. The distance is what creates the flame. And creators get this. You know, creators in the arts, they get this. And in life, with different subject matter, we can use this same instrument. We can use this same force. It's a very powerful force. Very different than positive thinking, you know, where the positive thinkers say, well, don't look at the negative. Don't be negative thinkers. You're not doing either one. All you're doing is observing the accuracy of current reality. And you're removing any conceptual lenses and filters and saying, this is what actually is going on. And the more direct and accurate I can be, the greater capacity I have to propel that arrow. I got a lot of force to work with. And you know, it's interesting. Within that space, I've just noticed in my life and coaching hundreds of entrepreneurs that they find miraculous occurrences, almost so coincidental. You know, they meet the next person at the library that they want to be with, or they meet their next employee at the market, or they find a book that directly delivers a message that they were looking for. These sort of unexpected sudden events that sort of come up and you go, What is that? How did that all tie together? Who was listening, And I don't know how it works. It's like electricity. You just turn the switch and you just use it. I don't know how it works, but it just does. So go ahead and use it. And it also gives you a great opportunity. It creates a great body of knowledge because a lot of what you're creating, a lot of what you're looking forward to, it hasn't happened yet. So you're kind of originating separate from what you know how to do. You're originating something separate. And in that place of, I don't know how, but I know I want this, you begin to assimilate knowledge. You begin to understand how. By trial and error, by experimentation, by strategic action, by trying stuff out. It didn't work. And you create a learning process. And within this, you learn your own rhythm. Sure, other answers are helpful, but not all of them are going to be sufficient to meet your goals. There's a real individualistic learning process that goes on here. And I don't know any other better way to learn than to bring something to happen that doesn't exist yet. I mean, isn't that fun? You're pleasurably involved in something you truly want to create. You understand where you truly are in contrast to it. And as you're taking action along the way, you're actually benchmarking. You're saying, boy, I've really made some distance. So you can pat yourself on the back for successes. And when you have failures, you're not so caught up in it being personal. You're just observing reality as it is. And it's not about you. And when it doesn't work, you make adjustments, and that's equally valuable to when it does work. Because here's the deal. There's not so much you can control. That's part of the unwinding here, is that as you begin to work on this, you realize how out of control you really are. We're not assuming that planning equals control. That's not what planning is for. The planning helps you make better day-to-day decisions because you're on purpose with a sense of what you want. And you're on track with a sense of where you are. I got to tell you, the sense of where you are is more powerful than the sense of what you want. The what you want piece is easy. I mean, you can make that up. You can draw out your imagination. You can come up with a picture and start to really embed that. You start to really absorb what that means to you. And you kind of learn it in stages. You start off, it's sort of a concept, and then you begin to create some of it, and you go, oh, this is pretty good, And that's a whole other point, is that as we start off, there's not a lot of motivation. I mean, there's a sense of purpose in that you know where you're aimed, and you have this line of sight. You begin to line it up, But the motivation doesn't come until you get a couple of wins under your belt. And then you start to go, wow, no, this is working. Or it's really not working, and I need to make some adjustments. So current reality is so powerful because it allows you to actually spark the change. This is where change actually happens. I'll give you an example. In the personal finance dimension, I wanted to be financially independent within 10 years, and I'm still on the path to doing this. This was a specific outcome that I wanted to create several years ago, and so I'm still in process on that. But as I started off, I went through this current reality description, and I wrote down that I know nothing about money, and my parents never taught me anything about money, and by understanding that was my starting point, as much as I was ashamed about it, which was my own story, right, because I'm the only one keeping score. That's my ego. I realized that that's really what was going on, and as a result, I started putting people around me that had a greater intelligence about money, taking care of me in that area. I started doing some research on money. I started finding out a little bit more about it, reading about it, getting great authors in my life that could help me with it. Now I'm relatively schooled about money. I mean, I'm schooled enough to the point to become financially independent, and I'm on the path. So there's an example of how current reality can be so powerful in igniting a change. And it's the area that we don't like to look at because this is where change really happens, and it's not comfortable. But once we look, it kind of sets you free. It sets you upon a new change. It makes space for something new. All right, so we're talking about observing current reality without lenses, right? Looking at it as it is, actually. What's working, what's not working, and describing it in relationship to the targets and the vision that you want to create. Once we go there, now, as you've established those two reference points, you ask yourself a question. What has to happen now in order to create what I want then? What has to happen now in order to create what I want then? All right, so your mind starts to kind of come up with a here to there. And you might ask yourself, I wonder what has to happen first. If I'm going to move current reality toward what I want, what's next? And then you look at that and you ask yourself, is that really what's first? I mean, could I schedule that if I wanted to? And if the answer is no, you might ask yourself, well, then what has to happen first? And then you look at that and you go, I wonder what could I schedule that? No, that's just too much. I can't schedule that yet. What has to happen first? And then you come up with another sub-maneuver. And it's this process of distilling down what your original material is going to be, where you actually start off, that makes it easy. See, part of the reason plans don't come to fruition is not because we're out of control, and it's not because the universe isn't cooperating with us. There are days when it does, there are days when it doesn't. It's because we didn't start from the finish and work our way back to a beginning. It's because we just start. And just starting is good. I mean, we don't have all the knowledge to know, otherwise we'd be there. So starting is great because it starts the process of assimilation and knowledge and learning how. It's a learning process. But when we design our plan, now we've got to design a strategy, an overall plan, a game plan. And strategy means what projects, what overall outcomes are going to require several tasks. What are the bold new initiatives that I'm going to need to take in order for me to reach what I want to create, looking at where I am? And you begin to ask yourself, what are these initiatives? So go through each area, in the relationship with your children area, the relationship with your spouse, your business, your health, your spiritual dimension, then your extracurricular activities, maybe charity, community, whatever domains that you've designed for yourself. And you ask yourself, what are the key projects? What are the key moves that are going to help me close the gap between what I really want and where I actually am? And it's interesting, several things come up. Maybe there's some personal habits that you need to change. Maybe there's some specific maneuvers, things that you need to be doing. On the business front, that might be very easy for you. There are several projects. On the relationship front, there may be specific planning items that you want to get to. There may be trips to go on. There may be classes that you want to take together. Maybe counseling is something you want to do together for your mental health together. Maybe it's date nights. You want to start off a date night program, and you're going to schedule it. Now, there's a difference between projects and tasks. It's very similar to strategy and tactics. From a military standpoint, strategy is the overall plan. We're going to take the hill. Tactics are the smaller maneuvers to fulfill the plan. We're going to flank from the back, come in at 360 degrees. We're going to drop in from the air raid. We're going to bring in 7 platoons on the ground. So getting from strategy to tactics is a real trick. And I'm going to give you a tool to do that. So this is called the 2-part question, and I've already started working with you on it. It goes something like this. Could this happen tomorrow? If yes, schedule it. Could this happen tomorrow? If yes, schedule it. That doesn't mean you're going to do it tomorrow. It means you could schedule it in your calendar somewhere. If no, then what has to happen first? If no, then what has to happen first? So let me give you an example. Let's say that one of my projects is to throw a dinner party, a bash, for Christmas dinner with all of my favorite friends and associates because I want to strengthen certain social relationships. I have a very specific vision. I have a yardstick. One of those yardsticks is how many get-togethers. I love functions, barbecues, backyard bashes, bowling nights. I have all these activities I want to do. And so I ask myself, I really want to put together a Christmas bash. Okay. Could it happen tomorrow? No. So if no, what has to happen first? Well, I need to put together the guest list. Okay, could that happen tomorrow? If yes, schedule it. No, then what has to happen first? Well, the first thing I need to do before the guest list is I need to establish the menu. Could that happen tomorrow? If no, what has to happen first? If yes, schedule it. Yes, that could happen tomorrow. So I look on my calendar and I take next Friday and I schedule in that specific item. What we're doing here is we're distilling down through the 2-part questions. We're distilling down where we're going to begin because now I'm going to begin with that menu, and there may be a couple other supporting elements for the menu, and then I'm going to build the guest list, and then I'm going to probably schedule the bash. So I'm laying out a specific linear sequence back to a beginning. Sometimes plans are so big that they're intimidating. We don't want to start them because we have big stuffitis. We're just waiting for tomorrow. It'll all come together. And it doesn't happen. It happens by chunking. Chunking down specific maneuvers that are less resistant, easier to do, and easier to facilitate in your calendar so you can make some true distance. Some of the plans that I set, some of the initiatives that I set, may not be directly what's going to take me to what I want to create. And so this is another way I can approach it. I can ask myself, is this exactly what is next in helping me create what I want to create? If it's not going to directly take me there, then what would? What would be a maneuver that would take me toward what I want to create, that would support this and would support what I want to create? So I'm breaking down strategy into tactics, projects into tasks, calendarizing those tasks when they're fit to calendarize. The final component is implementation timeline. It's all about implementation. What's a plan worth if we don't implement? So now we've got all these maneuvers, we've got projects, and we begin to attach a timeline, a kind of a chronology to it. And you might think in quarters. You might say, well, quarter one, this is what's important to me. Quarter two, quarter three. And this is nice because it's dimensional, it's not linear, and it allows you to discriminate certain priorities within a quarter and certain priorities that are within a subsequent quarter. It helps you lessen your overwhelm, so you work within a specific dimension of time, and you deliberately plan out. You put in the penalty box, you put out on the side other things that aren't going to be relevant during that time. So you may lay out your first quarter, maybe your second quarter. Maybe when you get into second quarter, you lay out your third and your fourth. Another thing that you may want to do is do the within technique, WITHIN, within 30 days, within 90 days, within 180 days, within 1 year, within 2 weeks. Another technique is to establish a deadline. A deadline meaning in the concentration camps in Germany, when you stepped over the line, you were killed. That's where the word deadline came from. It essentially means that nothing moves after the line. Well, when you don't meet a deadline, it doesn't mean you're going to die. But it is geared to organize action, and that's why we make deadlines. So you may want to just make up a date when you plan to create that task or that project. So you can establish deadlines for goals, you can establish deadlines for projects, you can establish deadlines for tasks. And the key here is what's scheduled gets done. So what's in your calendar will probably have a much greater chance of getting your attention and getting implemented. So now we've got all of these aspects. We've got a plan, we've got a roadmap for all these areas, and you might be asking yourself, but JD, these are a lot of projects, man. These are a lot of tasks. How am I going to simultaneously maneuver all of these? Well, take out an average week. Let's look at a perfect week. You have a lot of activities that need to be done. So let's time block. Maybe you have certain themes that you need to block out. You have themes for spiritual. You have a thematic time block for your workouts. You have a thematic time block for activities that support your intellectual capacity. You have schooling maybe. Maybe you have activities that support different chunks of your work, like preparation time. You have money-making time. And maybe on your life, in your lifestyle, when you're doing no business and you're focusing on relationships, maybe you have other thematic things that you're doing. Maybe you have alone time. Maybe you have together time. Maybe you have children time. So you start to break down these projects and tasks into thematic blocks that you can work within. And you may want to take a typical week and lay out how these thematic blocks are all going to come together. You may find that there's a lot of overwhelm in trying to fit it all into 1 week. And so again, what are your quarterly themes? Maybe one quarter you're going to focus on this, the next quarter you're going to plug in this, and the next quarter you're going to plug in this. If you run out of the gate and try to do it all at one time, that's like the guy who says, I'm going to quit smoking, drinking, and cussing all at once. Habits and changes are about assimilation. And there's an assimilation period. It's been said that if you focus a habit over 21 days, you begin to get unconsciously competent with it. So we move from conscious incompetence to unconscious competence. And when you do this, you slow it down. So let's say I'm just going to focus on punctuality over the next 2 weeks. What's the likelihood of me being punctual? It's going to be very great. But if I focus on keeping my word, punctuality, finishing everything I start, and saying please and thank you to everybody, the likelihood of each one of those getting qualitative attention is going to be very low. So this is about focus. Thematically time blocking and thematically quarterly blocking, and enabling yourself to lay out a sequence so that you're focusing on just a few things that bring big results instead of a bunch of trivial things that bring lesser results. And this is about selection and focusing. Remember, you're getting the bull by the horns here, not the tail. You're the one who's planning your subject matter. All right, so let's go over the entirety of the map now. 1 is we lay out all the dimensions, right, the domains. 2 is we identify a vivid description in each area. 3 is we define measurements that support those vivid descriptions. 4 is we define goals, ideal targets, maybe 5 to 7, that embody those measurements. 5 is we define current reality, just the facts, good or bad or ugly, in relationship to what we want to create in each dimension. 6 is in each dimension we identify the projects, the overall game plan, the initiatives that are going to close the gaps between where you are and where you want to be. And then we use the 2-part question tool, or the tool of asking, is this directly going to get me to what I want to create? What else is necessary? By taking all our projects and breaking them down into tasks and then calendaring those tasks, and then laying them up into an implementation timeline organized by the within technique, quarterly timelines, or deadlines. You can deadline goals, projects, or tasks. Now you can lay out a perfect week and take all your thematic time blocks so that you can fit in all the components simultaneously in your life plan. If that gets overwhelming, then start to think about what's first, what's next, and you start to work in an emphasis. So once you've assimilated and become unconsciously competent in a habit, once you start going to the gym and it gets worked into your life without thinking about it, now we start working on the spiritual habits. And once we assimilate those, now we start working on some relationship habits. And once we assimilate those, that's it. You are 100% disciplined to your own habits. Habits create a future. Habits is really all about what you need to change. Not the only thing you need to change, but it is a big part. Only change the habits that are relevant to what you want to create. So we're not changing because you're guilty of something. We're not changing because you're removing a problem. You're changing because it is in favor of what you want to create. One more piece of information. When you go through the process of breaking down projects in each dimension into tasks, I want you to remember there are several types of choices that you're making. One is you're making a fundamental choice. The fundamental choice by doing this exercise, and fundamental means it gets down to the way in which you approach life. Fundamental means the essence, the structure of something. There are really 2 fundamental ways you can live. One is to live by a life plan. The second is to live by the circumstances. Go with the flow, ride the current. Both work. If you make a fundamental choice to live by a life plan, there are 4 different sort of distinctions in that. You can fundamentally choose to be free. You can fundamentally choose to be healthy. You can fundamentally choose to be a predominant creative force in your life. And you can fundamentally choose the relationships that you want to be in. Here's a couple others. Hey, let me add a couple more. You could fundamentally choose what to do with the time you have. You can fundamentally choose what your sense of purpose is going to be by doing all this. You get a sense of purpose. So you really have a great deal of freedom, and everything is up for grabs. And when you make that fundamental choice to be a more predominant creative force in your life, what you're doing is you're saying, no, I'm not going to ride the current. There's some things that matter to me, and I want to bring them to happen. Primary choices. Primary choices are goals. Primary choices are outcomes that you choose that support your fundamental choices. So when you're doing the goal setting, you're actually saying, I choose this. Not because I have to, but because I love it enough to see it happen. It matters to me. It supports what I want to create. It is something that matters deeply to me. I don't have to lie about it. It's not something that should matter. It's something that's directly a product of what does matter to me. Now that's powerful. Why? Because in that you'll have more endurance, you'll have more energy to work with, right? The learning process will be more patient because you're looking forward to something that you love enough to wait for. Great things are worth waiting for. And the next choice, the next type of choice is secondary choice. What are secondary choices? They support primary ones. Secondary choices are choices like projects and tasks that you know line up to support your goals. Now here's the thing. Your goals are primary choices. They may have a different level of motivation because they directly are things that you want to create, and you say, oh, I'm really all out on that. That's great. But secondary choices often don't have that kind of inspiration. They're not the kind of things where you say, I love doing this. For example, if I'm going to walk 3 days a week, I'll tell you that creating walking, which is a habit, is not something I enjoy doing. But because it's a function of my primary choice, which is to create a 34-inch waistline, so that I can support my vision to go to the beach and take my shirt off and feel great, I'll walk. And this is really big for folks because, beforehand, they didn't really get that, what do I do with all this resistance? There's going to be certain choices where you say, I got to do this because it supports what I want. And maybe there's certain weaknesses that your secondary choices are all about, and you could certainly delegate those weaknesses. There are ways to get out of difficulties and conflicts and resistance and draining energy and all that. Those are great strategies. But at the end of the day, not everything's going to be honky-dory. Not every day is going to be wonderfully filled with easy. Not every day is going to be wonderfully filled with support. Not every day. We all are called upon to do certain things out of our own personal responsibility that inevitably support what we want to create. And you're going to have some pushback on those. There's going to be a love-hate relationship. It's not about willpower. It's not about doing that. Willpower doesn't work because over a period of time, it just wears you out. It's like, give me the dragon. I'm going to slay the dragon. I'm going to force myself into conjecture. I'll do it. I'll do it. Or positive thinking, right? Trying to affirm to yourself that what is, it's really lying. You don't have to lie to yourself. Or trying to affirm to yourself that you are these things and swoon yourself into believing in a phony world that you actually are. None of that has merit, and none of that really leads to any sustainable change. You don't need to even change any of those things. Great if you think positively. The key here is that you're actually seeing what's going on. So I'm just reflecting back on, as you go through the moving parts of this vision mapping, what's really going on? You're making a fundamental choice. I think that's pretty cool to acknowledge. You are making primary choices. This is what I choose to, not because I'm committed to it. I don't have to, and not because I'm solving a problem, but because I actually want to see it happen. I'm generative in my focus. And I have secondary decisions that I'm going to make because I'm going to do them, and they operate on behalf of what I want, and so therefore I'm going to do them. It's not about how I feel about them, right? So here's a cure for procrastination right here, is instead of waiting until you feel motivated, or instead of waiting until you swoon yourself into liking it. A lot of hypnosis does that. We try to desensitize our bad feelings, and we try to anchor good feelings because we want to get through the easy doorway. But if you have a clear hierarchy of what's important to you, and you know what really dominates your heart and what you really want to create, then secondary choices are just simply a function of primary ones, and that's why you do them. And it's not whether you feel good about them, whether you hate doing them, it's just a function of what you want to do. And so it's like a line of sight. Secondary ones support primary ones, and primary ones support fundamental choices. And that's really what's happening here behind the scenes. That's the backstage. That's the undertone of the planning map. That's what's going on. It's exciting. All right, so you've been given a lot of tools here. You've been taught a roadmap. You've been taught a methodology for planning, how to lay out the domains, the dimensions of your life, and to articulate these steps and line up particular actions and activities, going to your calendar and getting yourself in motion and getting yourself self-directed, you see, and taking responsibility for what you want to create and orienting yourself day to day in making great decisions that are informed by these decisions. So here's the work. It's to actually do it. So go schedule a full day for yourself and get away from your typical run-of-the-mill routine. Go to some environment that allows you to do this easier. Go to the ocean, go to the desert, go to places that inspire you, go to the mountains, go to some natural environment that really gets you thinking this way. And you're not surrounded by pressure, you're not in the world of money, you're not in the world of time crunch, you're not in the world of the rush and the gush and the traffic, you're not in the world of using any of your left brain. You're in the world of your imagination, and you're in the world of reflection and mindfulness. And you're stopping and being still, and you're fiddling around with what's working and what's not working, what changes you need to make. So now it's time to turn it over to you. It's implementation now. Please go ahead and schedule that day so you can give this gift to yourself.